Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. This is episode 50. Can you believe it? 50. And this is a show where we talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And it's me, Demeere, your host. I wanted to rename the show now that we've come back after hiatus. I wanted to rename it along a joke that I sometimes use with a friend of mine and call it the show of the uncultured thug who lives far away from the provinces. Now it's a little bit of an inside joke, but it all boils down to a few thousand years ago. There was this guy called Julius Caesar roaming around the parts where I live, and he wrote about that. One of his little books was called De Bello Gallico, of the Gaul Wars. And in that, there's this phrase, and it starts, Horum omnium fortissimus sunt Belgae, which kind of translates to, of all these, the Belgae, the Belgians, are the bravest. He's talking about the Gaul and all the people he fought in these lands. Now, where I live, as Belgians, we kind of like that sentence, obviously, so we use it a lot, and it's used all over the place. But what people forget, and what I didn't because I actually had to study Latin, well, no, I chose to study Latin in school. There's a second part to that phrase, which is quite long. So I'll give you guys a rough translation. So Caesar said, of all these, the Belgae are the bravest, because they are the farthest away from the culture and civilization of the province, and the least frequently merchants travel to them and import those things which tend to effeminate the mind. They're also nearest to the Germans, who dwell, my German friends, you guys dwell beyond the Rhine, with whom they are continually waging war. So I made a meme out of that one a while ago, and it's basically a statue of Ambiorix, which was one of the Belgian leaders of the time, a warlord basically, and the statue is still up here in Belgium. And I said hillbilly thug life, and that's basically what it's about. He was a hillbilly, and he was a thug, and he celebrated. Now, a long explanation to say this, that if anything that is left over after the first wave of the pandemic hit is that you need a sense of humor. You need to be able to have a little bit of self-deprecating humor, because I think that's the only way to survive all this madness that we've lived through. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what it's been like for the last few months after I basically had this unannounced and unscheduled hiatus from the podcast. So what happened? Well, I'll get into that in this episode and talk a little bit about my plans for the future. Obviously, we all know the best laid plans of mice and men. You can look up that quote as well. But I'll talk a little bit about that. First things first. So all the things that I'll mention, if you go to wimsblog.com/50, number 50, you can find the links there. And as always, a shout out to Martin Kelly this time, who's an Orange Belt patron of mine since about late last year. Thank you, Martin, for your support. It's you and everybody else who support what I do that make this possible. And with that in mind, a little while ago, I created a separate page. It's at wimsblog.com/donate, DONATE, donate. And there's different ways that you can support the show. I set up a bunch of things, Patreon, Subscribestar, you can buy me a coffee, so to speak, PayPal, all those kind of things. Because over the years, I got some questions. People like one service, but they don't like the other. They like Patreon, but they don't like PayPal, vice versa, and so on. So I was like, okay, well, I'll give you guys the option. And if you liked what I do and you want to support it, that's great. I very much appreciate that. If you want to do something else, you can always share this episode with people, put it on social media, send it to friends who you think might enjoy it. That helps a lot. So that said, what happened? Why was I absent from the podcast for months on end? Because the last episode was beginning of May, if I'm not mistaken. So I started the year 2020 annus horribilis, to stay in the Latin team, with loads of plans. And I made those public. I said, this is my planning. This is all the writing, all the stuff that I'm going to do. And then all of a sudden, COVID-19 happened. Pandemic hits the world. As a result, everything gets turned upside down. My life changed radically, just like everybody else. I spent tons of time in front of the computer, and all of a sudden I was inundated with digital content, like Zoom calls, tons of those, webinars. I can imagine everybody has a similar experience, or many people have. Is that all of a sudden everything was going online, and it just kept coming and coming, and there was no end to it. And for me, in hindsight, I realized, that it became too much and something had to give. I had to cut some things. I did that instinctively. And for me, that was a podcast. Quite frankly, I just didn't have the energy left. There's a lot of reasons for that, why I didn't have energy left, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So I just couldn't do it. It was hard enough to fulfill the obligations that I have towards my patrons, getting all the content up there. All of a sudden, I didn't have access to training partners anymore. I couldn't shoot videos the way I would normally do. So everything changed, and it was just all sitting in front of the computer all day long. And there was this I have to admit, cognitive decline, that I found it difficult to focus, to remember things, because I was just constantly looking at that screen, and basically my life was very different from where it was only a few weeks before, where I was constantly on the road, working with clients, teaching classes, seminars and workshops and all those kind of things. And all of a sudden it's everything online. It took a toll. So, and unfortunately the podcast is what took the brunt of that. And that's where we are now. So I wanted to obviously first, tell you guys, I'm sorry if I let you down. If you were like, where the hell's the podcast, Wim? Well, I'll explain a little bit more in detail now. And also why we're back and what you can expect next. So this is about late February, early March. This is when the COVID-19 pandemic starts, gathering steam. At least in the media, it's very slowly coming to the foreground. I'm mainly talking about Europe and in particular Belgium, where I live. But at that stage, nobody knew what it was going to be like. I mean, we actually had virologists who are now saying very different things, flat out say like, guys, this is just a flu. Okay, there's no need to panic. Panic is a worse virus than everything else. And this is a literal quote. And now it's the exact opposite. So, a lot of lack of information, and a lot of that is not really surprising, because it was, as far as we know right now, it's a new virus, and there's very little information. Pandemics typically, from my understanding, you can only really find a lot of details and a lot of information about them once they're over. During, it's very difficult. But once it's all over, then you can look at all the data and do research and find out what the hell was going on during that time, and why this and that happened and why not other things and so on, what worked, what didn't work. But when you're smack in the middle of it, everything is so disrupted that it's very, very difficult. So nobody really knew what was going to happen. I mean, we've had pandemics before. And I think the latest really, really big one was the Spanish flu. But that's a long time ago as well. So a lot of people were completely unprepared. And this is a little bit of the upside of me being so heavily invested into self-defense, looking at what causes violence, societal problems, and so on. And one of those is, what happens when epidemics happen, or when something happens that causes society to either slow down or even break down. Pandemic is one of those. So I was acutely aware, as I started looking deeper into what was going on with COVID-19, that this had the potential to be really, really bad. So a few weeks before most people here in Belgium did the stupidest thing and started buying up all the toilet paper. I talked to her. I said, "Look, I think this is serious. I think we should start preparing." And we basically started setting everything up here in the house so that we would have enough food for months on end, and water and everything. And so that we prepped as best as we could without making a lot of noise about it. So that meant that by the time that we were in lockdown, we didn't have to rush to stores anymore. A lot of people did, but we didn't have to because we were ready for it. Now, ready, obviously, as far as we could predict, because nobody knew what it would be like. It's very easy to right now say, well, you exaggerated or you didn't take it seriously enough, because nobody knew. And it's a different experience for everybody, because we all live in different countries, different population, different contexts, different factors that are all involved. So just making these comparisons across the globe, just looking randomly at whatever country and saying like, well, these guys did great and these guys didn't. Hold on, it's not as simple as that. You have to look at a lot of details and factors before you can actually make an accurate comparison. So I basically said, look, let's prepare for the worst, and do within reasonable measures, do what we can to make sure that we're safe. We did, and then the lockdown came. So Belgium basically went from, guys, be careful, to full-on lockdown. I wasn't surprised, because from what I was looking at, I think Belgium was about a week, maybe at best 2 weeks away from Italian or Spanish type problems. Which meant that the healthcare system was breaking down. There were people in hospitals left to die alone in rooms because there was just not the staff, nor the equipment, nor the supplies to care for them. And there was basically what amounts to wartime triage going on, in like, okay, we've got 10 people here who need a respirator. Who's the least likely to survive? That's it. You're off to that room and you can go and die. And no, you can't see your family, you can't say goodbye, that's it, you're done. That happened in more countries than that, but apparently in Italy it was pretty bad, Spain was also pretty bad, other countries as well, but we were getting close to that. And in many regards, we actually had that, but it was more in nursing homes, where basically people were left to their own devices. They weren't really allowed to go to the hospital. Anyway, long story short, the lockdown happened. And all of a sudden, everything grinds to a halt. So the first few weeks for me and my girlfriend, we slept better and more than we had in a long time. It was kind of this release from all the stress, and also that the decision was made, like, okay, whatever comes next, we can't prep anymore. We're not allowed to go outside. Shops are closed. This is what it is. And that's it. So at the same time, I think it was also a reaction to the hectic life that we both lead. A lot of work. I work pretty much every day. I work holidays. I work weekends. I work mornings. I work nights. I'm working all the time at a very bizarre schedule. So a lot of time on the road as well, which means that for me it was recovering from just a constant grind of working. I think my body just said like, hey, dude, you've got some time to rest now. Now you're going to do it. And as soon as we went to bed, it was just lights out. And I would just sleep all through the night and only wake up in the morning. And it took a few weeks to actually settle down, where sleep patterns were more normal, actually. The downside of all that is that for about 2 months, I had pretty much zero income, because I wasn't allowed to work with people, with my clients. I work as a personal trainer mostly, also do some other stuff, but that's the biggest chunk of my professional life. And I wasn't allowed. We were not allowed to come into close contact with other people. That forced me to fundamentally change my business. I had no other choice. And the main reason is that pandemics, they tend to come in waves, and sometimes they go away for a little while and then they come back, and there might be years in between, or it might be just wave after wave for years on end. You don't know. They're different. Each one is different. So what I realized immediately is that I have to find a solution for the next lockdown, because this is not sustainable forever. So I did a bunch of things. I started with Zoom training sessions for clients. That worked out well for some people. Other people weren't really interested, but some people really enjoyed it. I did some more online consulting, and that didn't really compensate the loss of income, but it was better than nothing, which is what a lot of people have here in my country, is that they just all of a sudden went from perhaps even a relatively high income to zero. Nothing, everything just stops. But for me, the main thing was that I had to change the way I work, because all of a sudden, like, right, you're not allowed to interact with people anymore. You can't be close by. Okay, you're done. Your job stops. Now, after about 2 months, the lockdown started easing up gradually. I was slowly allowed to work again, and then business very slowly picked up again. And now, this is late September as I record this, things are mostly back to normal. But for me, this was also, I wouldn't say a wake-up call, but because it wasn't that, I wasn't aware of that. It's just that once you live through it, obviously when you run your own business, I'm self-employed, then you have to plan ahead. And if you encounter a problem, you want to make sure that if it happens again, you're better prepared. So I started putting things in motion. And the first few weeks of the pandemic, I did sleep well. One of the main reasons was also that I was working really hard on my computer at home, but I was working constantly. One of the things I did was put online a program for the Tai Chi Chuan style that I teach. It's a really easy to find course. You go to onlinetaichichuan.com and you find it. So I'll put the link again in the show notes. What is that? Well, I've been practicing and teaching Tai Chi Chuan for about 25 years now. It's the main art that I study, both for health and self-defense. For years, I've been working on this course, and I never really had the time that I could dedicate to actually filming it, getting it ready, and doing a lot of the behind-the-scenes work that needs to be done before you can actually start such a course. And all of a sudden, I had time. And this is the first time in my professional life that I spent so much time at home, and that I couldn't go anywhere. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. So, well, instead of binge watching on Netflix, I worked on the projects that I wanted to work on, and the online Tai Chi Chuan website is a passion project of mine, because it's my contribution to the art that has given me so much. Now, one of the things in this style is that it's a long explanation, but when you are accepted as a student, you kind of take on a responsibility to pass on the art to the next generation, and you try to do that correctly. What we call the true art is that you don't contribute in a negative manner, that you mess up the art. On the contrary, you actually want to pass it on in such a way that it has value for the next generation that comes after you, despite that the art itself might actually be very, very old by that time. So that means that it needs to stay relevant, and there's a lot of discussions that we could have about this, but for me it boils down to that if the art has value, then it is something that will shine through regardless of when it was created. And perhaps it needs to be viewed through the lens of the current times, the violence that we face, which will be different from what it was like in China, let's say a couple hundred years ago. But violence is violence, and a lot of the things that work then, in my opinion, will work now. So what I try to do is restructure the way that the art is taught, and that is mostly from my experience both as a student, still to this day, and as a teacher for many years, and try to teach it in such a way that the progress is more rapid for the students, because it's a difficult art to learn and to master, to get good at. And that is why I think a good teaching approach is what makes all the difference. So I spent many years thinking about that and experimenting with my own students. And now all of a sudden I had the time to finish that, setting up that curriculum, and then film it and then put it online. So the way it works, there's membership levels, there's 3 memberships levels. There's a basic one, which is just videos. And that's basically like being in class with me. Everything I tell my students is on those videos. If I teach the first movement of the form, you get the exact same explanation. You can just watch it over and over instead of me telling it you every single day, every single time in class. That's the difference. But other than that, exact same content. The second level is the same thing, same videos, but you also get to do asking questions. I do a Q&A video every month, and every month we do a live Zoom training session. People can join in. You want to, fine. You don't want to, it's great. You want to have your camera on, great. You don't want to, it's fine. It's basically me training and just having an online training session the way that I would teach my students in class. So that kind of gets around one of the first obstacles of online distance learning, is that you need interaction with a teacher. So that was what I wanted to do, to make sure that there is a way of interacting with the teacher and asking questions also. And then there's the highest level of membership, which is limited. There's only a couple spots, because that is all the previous things you get as well. But you can also send me every month a 5-minute training video, and I then use my coaching software that I do for the finance analysis, videos that I do on Patreon and the other stuff that you've seen me do online, where I can record as I do voiceover on the screen, draw, speed things up, slow things down, pause the video at certain points, draw on the screen. And I basically correct students with what they send me of their practice. And that way, that is the final part. That is then where you actually get corrections, as opposed to just doing your interpretation of what you see in a video course. So I wanted to offer something for everybody at whatever level they are comfortable at, whether it's just having access to the videos or having more and more feedback and interaction and eventually correction with me as a teacher. So setting all that up was a lot of work, and I'm talking months of work and lots of trying out, failing, trying over again by restructuring the content of the course, trying different methods, filming in many different ways. You guys have no idea how much footage I shot that I didn't use. Loads and loads of test footage, and it's still not perfect, but it's as good as I can make it. It's all full HD quality, so that's great. And I shot it outside here on the patio here at home where my girlfriend lives. It was really sunny in Belgium. We had several heat waves actually, so it was perfect conditions, and it was something I could do at home. That was also one of the reasons that I did the project, is because I could do it at home. I didn't need to go outside. And I'll talk about something else in a minute now. But the point is that it was a lot of work, and I'm talking a lot of work. I spent a long time just basically trying to edit it in such a way that I could just make the whole curriculum very easy to follow. And obviously the quality of the video files needed to be correct as well. So that took a while. That took a while, a lot of work. And sometimes it was like, okay, I'm stuck. I need to figure out a way around this. And eventually I did it, and the course went live. That was in August that it finally happened. So you guys can imagine the amount of work that I had just getting all that done. It sounds easy when you don't do a lot of work when it comes to video editing and creating content, but it's quite difficult. It took a lot of work, and I'm very happy that it's done. But that is basically one of the huge projects that I tackled and that I am spending time on. This is an ongoing course, which means that there's about, I think, 44 videos live right now. And I think we're closing in on about 4 hours of content right now. Every month I add a few videos. So right now, everything you need to know about some theory, some basics, some exercises, some drills, and then the short form, that is live already. First Q&A is live already. Several demonstrations of me doing the form in various different modalities. And you can watch that. Eventually, all the things that I teach will be available there. That means that all the self-defense applications, all the other forms, all the weapon forms, the push hands, everything will be there. The only thing that won't be there is our Negung exercises. So that is the Negung is, or sometimes people call it Qigong, is solo training. That is not part of the curriculum. That is the tradition in our style, is that you only teach it in person. As long as our head instructor says that that's the case, I will honor that and not teach that. However, I have been developing for a long time, my own Negung set, or Qigong set, if you want to call it that. And I will teach that eventually. And I'm still working on it. It's pretty far along, but it's something that is a good supplement for many martial artists, and also particularly for the style that I practice. And it's completely different from the 24 Negung set that is part of the curriculum. So that was one big part of how I spent my time and why it took up so much of my time that I couldn't dedicate to the podcast and other things. There was something else. I wanted to do something I got a lot of questions about from clients and people like, okay, what can I do to stay in shape? Because the gyms were closed. It's like all of a sudden, that's it, no more gym time. And, going outside and running here, you weren't allowed at first. You couldn't. You had to stay inside. So that's what a lockdown means. It was a hard lockdown. So what do you do to stay in shape, especially if you don't have a lot of room, you don't have a lot of equipment, and so on? So what I did is I made an instructional video for resistance band training, and that is a full body home workout. So it's specifically with martial arts and self-defense in mind, obviously, because some of the exercises, when you see them, it'll make sense. But the whole idea is that, right, you only need a resistance band, and you can buy those really cheap. I mean, like $20 is an average price for a decent resistance band. And you can do a full body workout at home. You only need a few square feet of open space, and that's it. If you've got a living room and you move aside the table, then you can work out. That's it. And sometimes if your living room is big enough, you don't need to do anything. You can just start working out. It's different from using dumbbells and barbells and machines. It's not the same thing, but it's cheap. And while you are not allowed to work out, or when you're traveling, that's why I use it a lot, because it's those resistant bands. They're really, really light and very strong. They last for a long time if you don't abuse them by letting them outside in the rain and the sun and so on. Then you can put them in your pocket, basically, and you're carrying your gym with you. So I made that, and that was also a fair amount of work to get all the exercises filmed and then do some decent editing. And I released that on my Pivot Share channel, and that one's been doing quite well as well. So all in all, if you look at the amount of time I spent creating new products, mainly videos and the video course, it's been quite productive. I know it doesn't look like that from the outside, maybe to a lot of you guys, because all of a sudden the podcast was gone. But it's not like that I was sitting idle, quite on the contrary. So that's what happened there. And again, I'll put a link in the show notes. And then the next big thing, George Floyd died, and his death sparked a lot of protests, a lot of riots. America burned and very rapidly changed. In my opinion, the media all over the world did a terrible job, a really poor job of covering the events, and they continue to do so even today. And I was very sad to see, but not surprised, that people are more polarized than ever. Everybody is basically in one camp or the other. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people are, and have a very hard time getting out of that mindset of us versus them. I've seen loads of violence in the US, and it's escalating. And given that it's an election year, it's bound to get worse. The main thing for me is that it also came to Europe. I mean, after George Floyd's death, I think it was a week after, could have been 2 weeks, I'm not sure. We had protests here in Belgium, across Europe, but I'm talking about Belgium as well. Mind you, that is during the pandemic. So protesting was not allowed. It was forbidden. You couldn't go to a funeral. You could not go to a wedding. But all of a sudden, they allowed a few thousand people to just protest in Brussels. And they knew it was coming. But they chose not to act, our government. So I was pretty pissed about that, because, rules for thee, but not for me. That doesn't really work all that well. I'm kind of against that. So there was more than that. Tearing down buildings, statues of people who have nothing to do at all. I mean, like literally nothing to do with anything that has to do with the death of George Floyd. And that's why I brought up Julius Caesar, because one of his statues was vandalized as well. Really? You're blaming Julius freaking Caesar for George Floyd's death? Really? Shame on you. So what it boils down to is that activists are losing their minds, and a lot of regular people are getting fed up. And historically, that means that violence will happen. And I was very worried about that. I've posted about that in the meantime many times online. And I don't see anything that gives me the impression that it's going to slow down. Typically what happens with the rhetoric and the protest activism and actions and violence and so on is that it comes in waves and then it simmers down again. But what I see is that there's a wave, it simmers down again, and the next wave is more violent. Now we've got people, shooting each other in the streets in the US. That's just happening on both sides. So it's I hate politics. People think that because I don't want politics on my social media that I don't have any political opinions. Oh, I do. But I think politicians are loathsome people because they're professional liars. Doesn't matter if they're from the left, from the center, or the right, because they basically end up always having to, at the very least, not mention the whole truth and only the parts that work well with whatever their party wants to do. So that's not the way that my brain functions. So I don't like politics at all, but I do have strong opinions. But my point is that if you think in dual mindset that the left is good and the right is bad, or vice versa, I think you're part of the problem. It's just people are people on all sides, and it's good and bad everywhere. Stupid people, smart people everywhere. And if you think that only the other side is wrong and the cause of violence, then you are sadly mistaken. I've lived long enough to see violence from both the right and the left, here in my country and in other countries as well. So I don't. I've said that on social media a while ago. I said I don't care who's wearing the boot, if it's the left or the right. If you put it down my neck, I'm going to push back. So for me, when I look at this whole situation, it's a mess. I don't see anything that gives me an indication that, it's going to quiet down, in particular with the elections in the US coming up. And you guys in the US might want to know that, like here in Belgium on social media, there's a lot of commentary on the US elections, lots of it. You'd be surprised because you guys have no idea about our politics. Newsflash, we still don't have a government. We're closing in on 400 and I forget how many days of not having a government since our elections. We might have one next week, but they've said that many times. And we still don't have one. We also hold the world record of forming a new government. It took us longer than Iraq to form a government, 500 plus days. I forget exactly how much, but we're well on our way to beat that record. So nobody in the US cares about Belgian politics, but a lot of people in Belgium have opinions about US politics. So, and it's a part of the whole polarization of society that you see mostly happening because of social media, because of the way the news cycle has gone 24/7, and because of the way that news media cover things, in my opinion, very, very poorly, where it's just clickbait news all around, and very, very limited, actually in-depth journalism that even attempts to be neutral. But that's a pet peeve of mine, so I'm gonna let go on that one and not bore you guys to death with that. So, next big part. What happened? Well, in these last few months, my personal and my professional life basically went through twists and turns. I've talked about my surgeries and the wear and tear on my body that all the training did in the past. I'm not going to repeat that, but I was in a fair amount of pain and discomfort, to put it mildly, during the pandemic, also because of a lot of the sitting in front of the screen. So I was a lot less active all of a sudden, and eventually I had an appointment with my surgeon, but because of COVID that couldn't happen. That was postponed a few months. Did that, bunch of MRIs, bone scans, blah blah blah. Then I had my appointment with him to discuss those scans last week. So, and the scans were taken in May and it's September now. So you guys can see that, COVID messed everything up. I was very lucky. I have a really good friend who's also a doctor, who was kind enough to just fit me into his schedule and take a look at everything. And gave me some really, really good tips and advice, and that helped a lot. And my surgeon last week told me, look, despite, surprisingly basically, and despite your size and all the training that you did in the past, the damage isn't catastrophic. So no surgery for me yet, which is for me great news, because I was, fearing that was going to happen soon. And there are some solutions to buy me time to avoid surgery for, as long as possible. So all in all, that's fairly great news. And that also means that I can do more stuff that I thought was off the table, training-wise, that I can actually do that again. Obviously being careful, but all that also took a fair amount of my time and mental energy, to put it mildly. And then we've got more stuff. Both my kids are in college now. So I am now officially getting to the part where it's empty nest. That was quite a little bit strange, a little bit adapting to how life suddenly changes. But they seem to be doing good. So I'm happy for that. But it also means that I have a little bit more time now on my hands, because I don't see them as much anymore, which is sad, but instead of sitting in a corner whining about it, I'm going to use that time wisely. I'll talk about that in a second. There's another big change in my personal life. I am not going to talk about it right now because I can't. But if I am lucky, in a few months, I might be able to make an announcement. And if that all ends up the way I want it to end up, it's going to be a huge game changer for me in a positive way. So hold your horses. Don't press me for information. I'm not going to share it because I can't. And once everything is confirmed and ironed out, then I will share when I can. So that's the personal part. And the professional part is, I've covered that a little bit before, but there were basically fundamental changes in my professional life and also for my future plans. I had a lot of plans at the beginning of the year. COVID-19 happened and changed everything. The world is very different now from what it was in January, and I've adapted to it. Now, I will keep on doing what I do now, so don't worry about that. The podcast is not going to go away, neither is my blog or all the other stuff that I do. In fact, I'm going to do more of it. And that is one of the things that I want to do is spend more time creating instructional videos, writing on my blog, writing books, working on my online Tai Chi Chuan course. And I've actually also started working again on my MMA formula channel again, which is where I do everything that I do about mixed martial arts. And again, links in the show notes. But I also started a Patreon for that because there will be unique content there. Most of you who follow me there already know me for the knockouts, the technical analysis videos that I do. So whenever you see somebody in a fight, usually it's big UFC fights, get knocked out, I'll do a video analysis of that. What I changed now is that some people complained about those videos being too long, and that always surprises me. Like, you get to see for free somebody who spent decades of his life fighting and competing and training, giving you instructional information for free, and you're complaining that it's too long. Like, for me, that's so strange because I grew up as a martial artist, as a young teenager in an era where, there was no internet, there was no YouTube, there were VHS tapes. We didn't even have DVDs. We had books with very little in it, and there was nothing. There was just nothing. I would go to Antwerp, to the bookstore, to the martial sports book store where they had equipment and books and videos, and be really excited to see if they had anything new, and very disappointed when they didn't. So that's how I started training, and now people just take it for granted that, hey, dude, I don't want to see, I don't want all that information. I want less. I'm like, okay, guys, you get it. So what I do now is on the YouTube channel and the social media for MMA Formula, I'll put a short and concise explanation of the knockout, and then do a long, in-depth one on the Patreon. I'm going to do also a podcast there, at first only on Patreon, and if the funding and the support comes in, then I'll do it, a bigger one that is available on all platforms. Do some technique videos, instructional videos, technique analysis, a bunch of stuff, Q&A, and basically it's going to bit by bit be built up into the same thing that I'm doing on Patreon for myself at the Demeere Patreon. The MMA Formula 1 is going to be the same thing, but on a totally different subject. So only about mixed martial arts. And I focus on striking because that's what I enjoy talking about the most. And there's already so many people online doing grappling for mixed martial arts that I don't think there's much that I want to contribute. But for striking, it's still relatively limited. So I wanted to do that. And if you guys are into that, check it out. Also, I'm going to write more. I've actually been writing more, following up on the Boxing for Self-Defense book series that I'm writing. The first one has been out for almost a year. Second one, it's 1.5. It's not the second one. It's an intermediate training guide. It's some stuff that doesn't really fit anywhere, but that I think people might need, especially beginners. And that one is going to come out next. And then I'll start on book 2, which is all the illegal blows in boxing and how you can use them for self-defense. I'm also going to do more instructional videos. I haven't forgotten my basic self-defense video program. Still have to release that more. And that and much, much more on the blog. I've got a few blog posts that are lined up already. So for me, in many ways, this kind of feels like a new start. I've got a bunch of new projects, new challenges coming up, and I hope you'll join me for that. Speaking of what's coming up next on the podcast, well, many months ago, I did an interview with a really interesting man, René Dreyfus, who's an MMA and grappling expert from New York, and we had a really good talk. I recorded the interview, but then again, the hiatus on the podcast started, so I am going to edit that next. That's going to be episode 51. And I hope you'll enjoy that. René is a really interesting guy, really great guy. I had a lot of fun talking to him, and he's very, very knowledgeable on different styles of grappling. And he fought in the early mixed martial arts days, so some of the really underground stuff as well. He's coaching guys now. So even if you don't practice MMA, I think you might want to listen to that as well. Particularly if you practice any sort of grappling, jiu-jitsu, judo, because René is also a judo black belt, you might want to listen to that one. If you have questions for the Q&A part that I like to do for the episodes here on the podcast, or suggestions for guests to interview, leave me a comment on the blog post for this episode. So that's wimsblog.com/50, the number. Or you can put it on my social media. I always like answering questions because it's one of those things that when you answer questions, it forces you to kind of think about things first. And that's the way I like to work, is that instead of just, ruminating in my own head, what I like to do is answer somebody's question. And then you can focus your attention on a specific topic and you kind of reassess what you know about it, restructure it. And very often just by somebody asking me questions and me trying to come up with an answer, I get new insights and, or I have to try new things and see what, so they do this technique or that question. How does that really work? Or how should that fit with what I already do? Or does that change anything? And more often than not, it's a learning experience for me as well. So leave me a question if you have one, and then I'll put it on the list and we can do some more Q&As. Right, guys, that's it. This is closing in on 45 minutes. So as always, I want to thank you all for your support over the years, and both for the podcast and everything else that I do. I wouldn't say I'm a reborn man. That might be a little bit too much, but I will embrace my uncultured thug from away from the provinces, my hillbilly thug life, as Julius Caesar called us. I will embrace that and try to enjoy life to the fullest, and just joke around in the podcast a little bit more as well. Bring you guys information that you can use for your own training. Do a bunch of fun interviews, and hopefully we can all stay safe at the same time while we do that. All right, that's it. I am out. I will talk to you next time. Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.